we've been very technology focused in platform engineering. And now I think it's time to put that focus away and look at where can we have the biggest impact.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 271, Solving Real Problems in Platform Engineering. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, many times we have people on the podcast, and especially over this past year, talking about platform engineering, and it's usually vendors talking about it, or we've talked about it from different perspectives. But we really haven't talked about it from people actually using it.
We haven't, because we are focused on salespeople, selling it first.
Did we say that out loud? Are we saying that we're shills for vendors? Is that what we're saying? To anybody else listening, and to Abby, I'm speaking specifically about Abby. Abby did a very good job on the platform maturity model. So, Abby, you can leave yourself out of that one. Today, we have Puja on from Giant Swarm. Puja, how are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. So, you're going to come at this a little bit different because you're used to working with large enterprises. I'm going to say it this way, trying to bring platform engineering into themselves. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, pretty much. Working with platform teams at these enterprises to bring platform engineering into their companies.
What's going on with that? Because we talk about, okay, small teams, that's easy to do, quote unquote, to do platform engineering in. Why is it taking so long, other than the normal reasons, for enterprises to really start adopting platform engineering?
To expand your question, given that those large enterprises are probably trying to do platforms for 20 years or something like that, right?
That is the thing. And I think that's exactly where theory and practice kind of diverge, right? At these big enterprises, you've usually started like a few years ago, and then you had a few people on the platform team, and they had longer and growing backlogs, and then you added people, and then maybe you have a few platform teams at some point, and you added teams for security and observability. And still, what we've been like looking at in the workrooms upstream with Abby, for example, in the model, but also in the white paper before with the workgroup platforms, was this platform as a product concept, right? But this has usually not been a thing at companies itself, right? Because it wasn't a product to start out with. It was just like, hey, we need someone to take care of these things. In the beginning, it was just, we need someone to take care of Kubernetes clusters. And then their job expanded to, now it's going to be called platform.
Is that the major difference, that somebody needs to maintain it?
I think it's both that somebody needs to maintain the custom things, right? The glue that glues together all these CNCF projects, but also that somebody needs to stay up to date and see what are the new projects coming in, what do we need to change out, what do we need to switch under the hood, like what is the standard now compared to like 6 years ago. And that's just so much work.
Is there some pattern that you're seeing? You work with multiple, typically bigger companies, right? Is there some pattern that you're seeing that you can say, hey, based on my experience, platforms look like this? Or is it all over the place and everybody goes in a random direction?
I think the biggest pattern that you can see in enterprises is Confluence as the interface. Right?
Oh my!
This is like the most interesting thing. This is just like this. It started as the documentation of the platform, But at a lot of companies, it becomes like part of the platform because that's where they share templates or they share best practices and ops recipes, and it becomes kind of the portal, right? There's no backstage or something. There's oftentimes it's Confluence as a portal, which is quite interesting because a lot of end users told me it works for them, right? Nowadays, they might be looking into things like Backstage and UIs, and some bigger enterprises have certain UIs built, usually a website to request a namespace, for example. But oftentimes at bigger enterprises, you have huge processes and workflows behind that, like who needs to accept a workflow, who needs to like sign off on you getting your cluster or your namespace. The more complex the process is, the more you see, okay, it's just documented somewhere in Confluence usually.
I have a theory that the usage of Confluence or other wikis and documentation things and UX are a constant. The less you have of one, the more you need to have of another, right? And when I hear that somebody has a heavy usage of Confluence, my first thing that goes to my mind, and I might be wrong, is, okay, that means that their user experience is horrible, right? So you need to read a lot to understand what you need to do.
Indeed. I think one of the reasons why a lot of even, I'd say, vendor products in this space have not as great user experience is that platform teams and like DevOps engineers, SREs, we like to think of like APIs and CLIs are the place to be, right? And the real user experience on the UI side never happens. So the Confluence basically just is a replacement for the UI. And you see some projects really being successful, like Argo, because of its UI was so successful, right? It's the gap in understanding of user experience between more technical people and the end users, which we think are all technical, right? They're developers, right? But developers also sometimes like UIs. Not all of us live in Vim, right?
I still feel that those who do start from API and forget somehow the user experience on top of it are still more likely to build the user experience at some later date than those that start the other way around. You know, if you start with the user experience and say, I'm going to make this the most beautiful thing, most useful thing in the world, without really thinking about what's going to happen behind the scenes, I feel that those are more likely to fail, even though it might not look like that, right?
Yeah. And I think the fallacy is usually when you start with UIs, you build the business logic into the UI. And then suddenly you have business logic in an interface and you can't move it to other interfaces. Like what if you batch create projects, right? Nobody wants to click 100 times into a UI. And those are the things where when you start with an API, you have a sound design, and ideally you can maybe even generate UIs from your API. It's becoming a nicer pattern, but even Backstage doesn't really want you to do that, right? The scaffolding is business logic inside of the UI. There's like UI tools try to motivate you to build business logic into it, while it should never live in there. They should always live in the API.
To me, and this is going to be a bit of negative or trash comment from my side, I feel that Backstage was designed actually with that pattern in mind. I'm going to use whatever you have. I'm not going to change a single thing behind the scenes. I know that you can do everything you want with Backstage. There is no pattern. It's not forcing you to any pattern, but it's almost like inviting you to do the wrong thing in a way, right? To hard code all the bad things into it, right?
Exactly. And I think our user experience designer was of a similar impression that there is no best practice pattern, and the common pattern, let's say, the bad practice is way too inviting for building not great UIs.
I sort of like the idea as Confluence as a platform. It just feels right. I don't know why. It doesn't have to be pretty to me, but it feels right.
I think it's right if it's anywhere where your people are hanging out, right? If the organization is used to hanging out on Confluence because everything is already living there for 10 years and they use Jira and all these tools around it. I've never used these things, by the way. Just talking about them from the outside, I've seen them at some of the customers. I think when you're anyway as an organization living there, meeting your users where they already are, that might make sense to have your entry points there. And for some, if you design it well and you move people into an automated place from Confluence, that might work well, right?
What you just said is the key part that every vendor needs to listen to for the next century or three. Build your product where your potential people already are living.
But that's the thing. I'm not sure whether users are living in Confluence and similar tools or that they're forced to live there. Because if you tell me, build it where the users are, my first association would be, okay, he's talking either about GitHub or Slack. He's talking about one of those two things. Because it doesn't even cross my mind that users are in Confluence, actually. I mean, I know that they are, but that's more out of necessity, I feel, than because they want to be there.
They're forced to be, right? They would rather be in GitHub or GitLab, whatever they have. Usually it's Teams, sadly, not Slack, these companies, right?
Okay, or Teams. I mean, I'm not using Teams, but I'm guessing it's the same thing like Slack, right? That's where you are. That's the first place. I mean, because when you look at it from behavioral perspective, imagine that we don't have any platform right now, right? We don't have even an attempt of the platform. What is the place where somebody would go to request something or ask for something or hope to get some help? That would be Teams or Slack, right? If you don't have a platform, if you didn't tell them go there.
Most probably, yes. But then we're back at like ChatOps integrations, right?
No. I'm not suggesting that. I think the ChatOps is a silly idea. But if you're talking about where they are, then, and the first option is not the good one, like Slack or Teams, then we must go back to GitLab or GitHub. And that's not necessarily a bad idea.
I do like the GitHub one, actually. I think it's the interface you should focus on once you started, right? Once you started actually working on the project, coding, developing, testing, all these things. I think for the information gathering part, people might be used to Confluence, but there's also the other side where maybe getting it into something like Teams might be a good idea. I think what I've seen there, actually, I was having this like very short end user meetup around AI. I'm sorry. The use cases that everyone in big enterprises is now like looking in is, can we get our Confluence, our wiki, our internal information into a chat format that is better accessible and better searchable? Because search in these tools is usually bad, right? Search in Slack, horrible.
You know, the thing I don't like about the idea of Slack and similar is that those are not designed to really present you with information in a useful format, right? I cannot really observe the status of something in Slack. I don't want to do that. It makes sense to start with Slack, right? Chat can, how do I do this, right? But that's going to lead you towards a link that will send you towards a tool that you know nothing about, that is not designed for you. It's going to send you to something that Joe in a basement uses because he's the only one who understands security, right? Instead of sending you to something that is designed for you in a way.
In a way, that's really hard to get together. And I think that's where sometimes this backstage idea of having like one place where you have an aggregated view of like interfaces, and then you can drill down into specialized interfaces, like from, Grafana plugin into the actual Grafana, from an X plugin into the actual interface of that, makes sense. But I think currently plugin developers are not thinking about it like that. They're like, let's build a light version of whatever we already have as a Backstage plugin. But you should rather think about like, how can we actually think of like an aggregated view and something that actually helps either the platform teams or the developers to get the overview over what they actually want. They want to see, is everything running, right? It's like my status screen, or if it's orange, they want to drill down. If it's red, they want to go into an incident, right? And these connections, I'm not seeing a lot of people working on building these connections, but they're the powerful ones, right? Once I'm seeing something is breaking in production, once I have an incident, I need to get a very direct way into all these tools that I need for debugging and fixing.
I feel that might be actually part of the problem, is if those backstage plugins would actually show you all the information you need in backstage instead of sending you to those individual tools, then a big part of the problem I feel would be solved. Because I feel that the problem is, okay, you're telling me that I need to go to those 57 tools to do something useful, right? And you, the person who designed it, you're familiar with those tools, but I'm not, because I'm a Node.js developer, right? Don't send me to 57 tools. And yet, that's what those plugins are doing in a way, right? They're giving you just enough information. Happy path is there, kind of. If nothing ever goes wrong, I'm happy in backstage, and then my happiness stops in a way. And if I would be familiar with all those tools, I'm not sure that I would need backstage in the first place. So it's almost like a chicken and egg problem.
And that's why I think, at least during the development process, the GitHub integration is much nicer than an interface that you need to switch back and forth. Like getting things back into your PR, having, I don't know, a bot posting the results of a test and the link to your staging URL, and failed tests, best practice recommendations. Like, hey, you forgot to add security context to this, or you're running with elevated privileges, you need to request this from security, helping you along the process, but where you are, right? And I think that's something that, like, while we said things should be shifting left, it's not that suddenly the developer has all the responsibility. They can't, right? They can't work with all these tools. They don't know what to do. But integrating it into their GitHub and helping them create or request the resources that they need, that would be something. Because everything you see in demos is usually what you call the happy path, right? It's like if everything works fine, super nice. All these nice demos, I get everything deployed. What happens if I need root, or I need certain ports or certain host paths? How do I request them? Is there a process for that is automated, not like going back to Confluence and filling a form of 10 pages, right?
I feel that even filling a form is not a big deal, because if somebody created a form in Confluence, let's say, we know, then that means that we know what we need to do, right? I'm more concerned that there is often not a clear distinction between known and unknowns, in a way that, hey, this is the moment in time where you should switch from using that platform to contacting Joe, right? Yeah. As if we don't think enough, when is the handover, right? When does the happy path stops?
Yeah, I think we even stop earlier. We don't even think about how to solve problems. We just show problems, right? That's how we do it with like webhooks, Kyverno, right? It just gives you an error and says, you're not compliant, like, and this is the problem. But how do you solve it? How do I find that information? It's usually not linked in that error message, right?
Don't let me get started on it, because I feel that when a webhook from Kyverno, and I love Kyverno, by the way, but when a webhook triggers and says you cannot do this, the only thing you can... Exactly. And the only thing you can do is say, call your manager and say, disable that webhook. The solution is to disable the webhook, because there is nothing else you can do, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly where you go back to like the GitHub integration. You need the validation before you go into the cluster, right? If Kyverno is telling you something, that's way too late already, right? Because you were trying to deploy. Like, why only tell them once you're there? You need something like a dry run, right?
But it's not only whether it's too late or no. I feel that it's And now what type of question? Like, let's say that you discovered that that issue that because of which you cannot pass by webhook. And let's say that you moved it earlier, right? Let's say that you put it in Visual Studio Code when you're writing that YAML or whatever you're doing. You're still faced with, okay, but what do I do? You cannot have a privileged pod. Okay, but that's the only way I know how to do this.
Yeah, there is no how to solve this or why even, right? All images need to come from our private registry. How do I do that? Like, why wasn't this done for me? That's usually the things, right? There's the why, the how to solve it, and then how to escalate, right? Who do I talk to? And in smaller organizations, that's easier, right? Like if you're 15 people, you're most probably even sitting in the same room or in the same channel in Slack. But if you're a lot of people, you most probably don't even know who to talk to.
You're both circling around the idea of context. These tools are not giving us enough context.
I would say that actually, in some other cases, maybe even more often, is this tool is giving me too much context, right? Because you will see a huge stack trace or whatever else saying, okay, there are 200 lines of some output telling you that this cannot go.
Okay, I'll agree with you on that. I guess, so what am I trying to say, Victor? Because I'm not getting enough of the correct business context, enough of the correct technical context. What am I not saying correctly here?
Is it maybe this differentiation? I just remember we were studying this in uni. It was like you have data, then you have information, then you have knowledge, right? And we're just presenting data, right? We are presenting your logs, right? And then you need to parse that into information that makes sense for you. And you need that context to actually create knowledge around it. Like, what do I fix now? But we're stopping at data usually. Like that's the observability stacks, right? We're just showing data. That's what we're good at.
I feel that that's the key. And the biggest problem that we are facing right now as industry, at least in a part of building platforms, is all that data that we are shipping to others, they're designed for us, right? I'm a security expert, right? This is the data that is useful to me. And the natural conclusion is I'm going to give it to others. And I feel that that's where the problem is. That we somehow need to figure out, okay, but what is the data useful or information context useful to others? And it's not the same.
Yeah, that's why we were saying, like, treat your platform as a product. The main thing there is understand your users and understand how they actually work. It's a super nice excuse to always say, we used to be developers too. You're a different kind of developer than the current, JavaScript developer or the Java developer in your enterprise. By definition, because you went into this really crazy stuff that is called Kubernetes and containers and Docker. You feel like you understand these people because you used to be, but you don't.
Could we restate it to the point to where we're giving people data, which we're equating to knowledge? Shouldn't we be giving people wisdom instead of just knowledge? How do we give people wisdom then?
That's a good question. Making it more actionable. That's one of, like, not just giving you an error message, but telling you, okay, this is how you find out how to fix it. And if you still are struggling, this is how you escalate and find someone that will help you to fix it.
What you just said there is the key point. A and B and C. We do good to get even a reasonable A right now. I'm thinking Star Wars just for moments, like, okay, am I getting C-3PO or am I getting Obi-Wan Kenobi? Today's world is C-3PO. We need Obi-Wan.
I think that those are the same mistakes that we can see everywhere. Imagine you, Darin, for example, or Puja, you download now some project that is a CLI that does something. Let's say AI, right? Just to piss everybody off. There is a problem, and the developer of that tool just outputs to you the error, right? The 57 lines of error. That's a bad design, right? A good design would be, I could not connect to ChatGPT. Please check your settings. There should be an entry line, this one, where you put your, ChatGPT token, right? That's a good error, right? A bad error is when you just push to users whatever was shown as error in your code by communicating with that API, right? And we see that with the tools all the time, right? And that's what we do with our tools as well. It's the easiest thing to do is just to pass along whatever you are getting when you debug your problems yourself.
On the other side, like just to play a bit devil's advocate for the platform teams, like oftentimes it's not that they're like deliberately just stopping at a very low level. It's oftentimes that the backlogs are so long that you need to like quickly deliver something, right? Your to-do is your, GitHub issue, Jira ticket is have validation in GitHub, right? And then the minimal way to implement that is just get that CLI that you already have in the tool, output it standard to your GitHub bot, right? And you don't think, you don't have the time to think about this last mile of, did I actually help the developer with that? But then the organizations are wondering, like, oh, why are we not getting faster with this platform, right? There's a priority problem, an investment problem oftentimes, right? Because there is way too few people usually in these teams, and they have so much work. They need to take care of everything from the AWS or machine instances to the Kubernetes and Argo CD and even like the minimal deployments and some kind of abstraction level and documentation. Something's got to give, right? And the easiest to just skip is the last mile. That's why we always are bad at documentation in all of these tools, right?
Okay, can I have a solution for a minute? Because why not? And if somebody steals this idea, you owe me a royalty. So all this thing we're talking about, we have this 57-line stack trace. And that's okay, whatever. But if we came up with a unique code for when we put things in, like globally unique within the organization, and then I tie that back, you're going to hate this, we tie this back to a page in a wiki. I'm just saying it generally right now. Could be Confluence, could be anything else. And that ID maps to that page. That way anyone, meaning PMs, engineers, SREs, could go in and update that Confluence page with full context. Then, when those kinds of things happen, let's say it happens during a build process in Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub, Jenkins, whatever, doesn't matter. All of a sudden, we see all the systems are aware of this magic error code, not the magic error code, but how an error code looks. And it knows to go do that lookup. So then it can bring in that either the full thing or, depending on the tool could decide which way do they want to pull it in. Do they want to bring in the full contents of that or just a link over to that of what to do? Then it's not developers on the hook for managing that page that has all the information. Because right now, all developers would have to put everything in the code, and that would suck.
I think the problem is slightly different, right? The problem is that, especially because of the lack of time, we don't know what are all the permutations, what are all the issues, what are all the things that might happen, right? So we are just outputting whatever we can, right? We're showing you whatever we can show you. Once we get to the point that you're explaining, Darin, kind of, I know that this happens, and I'm going to create a Confluence page or whatever that explains what you should do next. That's the moment, that's the good part. That's the part where you can actually already codify, and you can have that Confluence page in your code and say, in a web UI or whatever, you can say, by the way, we did not think about it before, but now we know that this must be email format for this field, right? We were not sure before, but now we can codify that experience when we get to your point. I feel that the problem is actually earlier in the life cycle.
And in a way, I think the process you mentioned, Darin, is quite close to how alerts in on-call oftentimes work, right? You have like a runbook or an ops recipe that is oftentimes in the whatever Confluence or Wiki. And it's usually or hopefully linked in the alert I'm getting. So when I wake up, I click that, and ideally it helps me resolve the incident. And if not, I'll be very angry, and hopefully the next day I will raise an issue and say, hey, this didn't help me. It woke me up at 3 a.m. and I couldn't solve the issue. It took me so much longer. And then either I'm going to help improve it, or at least put out a request to improve it for next time.
I think we treat our SREs and our ops people better than we treat our developers. There, I said it. Because what you just said is, that's what I would expect when I'm on call. I expect, here's the thing. Because good, bad, or indifferent, a lot of times you're going to start in ops and you're not going to be starting in development, depending on where you are. That's just your inroad to the company. And you're not going to know everything. And you're going to need to be handheld. That's how I started out in ops. It's like, here's your run book, go deal with this thing. But we don't think the same way for our developers. How much more powerful would our developers be if we're truly shifting left? I really dislike that phrase. That if we gave them an on-call type experience when they hit a problem, because to them it is an incident, because they're not able to push an image. They're pushing the image to the wrong place. They're the blah, 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 whatever it is. How much more efficient, forget about efficiency, how much more money would a company be bringing in if they weren't dealing with all the stupid things?
I'm going to be a bad actor here, but I think that that's actually that's what is happening very often, and I feel that that's precisely the problem, because that run book, you as an ops person, you understand it. You can navigate through it. Me as a Node.js developer, you can give me, and you do give me already. I mean, we all have access to the same information. I don't know what to do with it. Just as you as an ops person probably wouldn't know what to do with the code I wrote.
Yeah, and I think currently oftentimes the answer to this is like you need to add a product person to that team, right? And the product person suddenly is like responsible for like talking to these end users, like bringing in the view of them. But usually it's not enough, right? It's like just adding a product person. How much work is that? A product person is not going to convince all the platform teams, all the engineers and SREs to suddenly be much more user focused and these things. You kind of need to bring this mindset into the whole platform team, like even into SREs. And it's really hard. We've tried this even internally, like bringing a different mindset into engineering. And you can't start with like the typical product tools. Like if you're like a standard educated product person, you usually have like a lot of product frameworks. Most of those product frameworks engineers don't care about. And they just think about, okay, this is not useful. In the end, I have a backlog and then I'm working off my backlog. But there is some tools that help engineers understand and connect their day-to-day, the features that they build and the code that they write, to an end user journey. And they don't need to be like over frameworkized, let's call it. You can use very simple tools and don't stick to the tools. I mean, use user journey mapping, but keep it on a level that works for your engineers. And we've been trying that with our teams and product owners in the teams, and it works somehow. Like as long as you don't try to like really stick to this like product principles and like make it like super dogmatic, it kind of works. And then try to understand what you call these use cases or jobs to be done, right? Bring them to a higher level, because that's where we stop, right? We're like, sometimes the requests for like the customer requests are like that, right? I want, tempo because I want traces, but that's not what they want, right? They don't even want traces. The problem is that they have an issue in production or in development, and they need to resolve that. And for that, they need data and information. And only if you zoom out, you can start thinking about not just, okay, I found this CNCF tool and now I implemented it, job done. But thinking about, okay, how can I solve this? Do I even need a tool? Sometimes I don't. Right? Sometimes I can get you the data somewhere else or can get someone in that helps. Maybe we have specialists and we do rotations into teams. A lot of good platform teams, like successful platform teams, start to onboard their developer teams by rotating one person, one SRE into the team and then rotating them out again, right?
I think that this ties us to the beginning of this conversation where, Puja, you said something along the lines that big part of the problem is that everybody's too busy and we don't have time to do everything we want to do. I feel that what you just said is the reason why that is happening, right? We don't treat it as a product. We don't have a product person who discovers what people need. We don't serve what those people need. Hence, we are not reducing our load by shifting it to them because they cannot use that thing. And it's a vicious circle in which nobody ends up saving any time. So nobody has time to do anything, right?
Yeah, and the management comes in and says cost cutting, right?
Exactly. And if we would have a product, and to be honest, I almost never see in companies building platforms, I almost never see that there is a product manager, right? Or whatever the role is. Maybe it's as simple as that. Kind of, we need a product person.
Yeah, and I think slowly companies are understanding it more because of, for example, also the work in the CNCF work group around platforms, right? Putting out these white papers, the maturity model, making it clear. And I think currently the work being done there is mainly about exactly this, like platform as product. The people are actually now doing interviews with actual platform teams to see like who's doing it, who's not doing it. Are they successful? How successful are they? Are there maybe other things? Because we think maybe it's just like treating as that product, but maybe there's other success factors. And I think going at it from the other side and looking at who has built successful platforms, or at least platforms that move the needle, maybe that's gonna also show us some things that we don't expect, because we're usually not the people that building the last mile, right? We are vendors or tool developers, so oftentimes we don't have that contact, this last mile contact to the actual developer teams, and don't see, is it improving metrics? Maybe are people even measuring that?
That's always the funny thing working as a vendor or working in a project. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then nobody uses it because it adds no value. You were going down the path of talking about successful platform engineering implementations. In your going arounds for all the enterprises you're working with, what is defining in 2024 a successful platform engineering team?
I think by now we're at a stage where successful platform engineering teams are actually going towards measuring their success, measuring certain KPIs or certain impacts. Also because they may be forced to, because suddenly enterprises, economies have not been great, so enterprises are much more strict, and they're not just like, oh, this is the hottest new thing and we can just put a few million on this. Suddenly we're seeing, and it's not just like, oh, we implement DORA metrics. Oftentimes DORA metrics are not even that useful, but actually starting to think about, are we making an impact and what is that impact? Thinking about it for each of the work packages or features that we want to build and see, okay, I think I'm going to improve this. How do I actually confirm that I'm improving this? And we've been talking about this in the maturity model where we were designing it, that it's very hard, let's say in adoption. I think we said on some higher level, you have a lot of people contributing to the platform, but just seeing the data point there, like a high percentage of end users actually contributing to your platform, is not often like the same thing in interpretation, because it could be that they're super unhappy with the platform. That's why they're contributing to change it, right? A low contribution could be because they're so happy. They're already getting everything, right? The other way around could be they're contributing a lot because they're super happy with the platform and they're really motivated. Right? But it's the context in those data and in the measures. So it's really hard, I think, to just put a random KPI on things and say, okay, this improved, because it's not always the same KPI, or it's not always the same interpretation of the same KPI. Again, there are also contexts, right? Surveys are so hard. That's why academics take so long time, right? It's like perfecting your surveys and making them unbiased.
And of course, then that's taking you away from doing real work, as if you're spending times on surveys.
Yeah. And there's frameworks for like automating certain KPIs like Dora. I think Apache Foundation has these things. But it's like also implementing those takes a lot of time, right?
And then again, you're still not solving the problems of the business at that point. You might be, but probably not.
I think one thing that you do there, like when you start looking at, I don't know, places where you're slow in your development process, is you can maybe prioritize better what to focus on. Not just focus on the next tool or the newest thing that came out in the CNCF landscape. We've been very technology focused in platform engineering. And now I think it's time to put that focus away and look at where can we have the biggest impact.
What makes CNCF special is that I feel that many of the CNCF projects are built by people for themselves. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That might be where we need to start. But hey, I'm a network engineer and this is what I need for myself and I'm giving it to the world, right? But maybe now it's time to focus. Okay, what do people who are not network engineers need?
So Puja, tell us about Giant Swarm.
So it's actually along the lines of what we've been talking about. We started out at Giant Swarm there is common things in cloud native, there's open source, and you shouldn't bother with it if you're an enterprise, because that's not your core business. So basically as Giant Swarm, we said, okay, here's a product and we take care of this product for you. It gives you your base platform, so you can focus on this last mile towards your developers. You don't take care of the Kubernetes or the Prometheus or the Ingress controller. You take care of how do my end users use this? How can I make this nicer for my end users? Focus on just that and focus on the things that are specific to your company, not the things that every end user in this ecosystem would anyway use.
And Giant Swarm can be found at giantswarm.io. All of Puja's information is going to be down in the episode description. Puja, thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.